Welcome to this Peachy Mondays conversation. I am Kerry Freeman. I'm a senior consultant with Peachy Mondays, and I'm also the former head of culture for NatWest Group. And I am almost fully a remote worker, but I spent almost 20 years in more traditional kind of 9 to 5 office environments. And I mention that because our topic today is remote working. It was growing massively in popularity before COVID, but many reports, like McKinsey's report, say that it's tripled or even quadrupled in popularity since the pandemic. And that's why I am delighted today that we are joined by Valentina, who's an expert in the subject. I'll just hand over to you, Valentina, to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Kerry, and thank you for having me. I'm Valentina Thörner. Everybody always skirts around my last name because I'm German, but it's just like Tina Turner. We just write it a little bit different. I'm, as you said, an expert in remote work, and I say I'm the Empress of Remote. That's why I always wear a tiara, and my logo is also tiara. Very easy to recognize. And I help specifically product leaders to engage and develop their distributed teams. Now you'll see I already say distributed team and not remote teams, because remote is such a fuzzy word that it's really, really difficult to actually pin down what people say about this. I've been working distributed or not in an office or remote for the past almost 15 years and for the past 7 years in leadership positions. And I help companies to do it better so that it works for them, because flexibility and adaptability also means you have to take a lot of decisions, and having somebody to guide you through what decisions to make can be quite helpful.
Brilliant, thank you. Let's go back to what you just said at the beginning about distributed working, flexible working, remote working. How would you define remote working and all of its various bits?
So I always like to compare it with a restaurant. If a company tells you, we offer remote work, that's about as specific as when a restaurant tells you, we offer food. Amazing. I would like to know more details. Like, what kind of food is it? Do you have specific opening hours? Do you do delivery, or do I have to go in person? And the same happens actually with remote as a company. What does it mean for the location? Is there an office? Is there no office at all? Do I have to work from home? Can I work from a co-working space? Can I work from a random cafe or from the local library? Or are there any security concerns that need to be addressed? Can I work on an airplane or on a train where somebody's sitting right next to me? So there's a lot of decisions that need to be made around what does not in the office actually means, because there's more than one option. Most of us, of course, think about the pandemic, and there the option was at home because we had the shelter at home mandates in many countries. But nowadays, technically, you don't need to stay at home. And the same goes with time. Do I have to work from 9 to 5 or from 10 to 6? Or can I work whenever I want to? Are there specific core working hours, or can it be just all over the place? Can I work at 3 a.m. in the morning because creativity stroke or the kids are finally in bed? Or like, how is this handled, and are there any policies around it? Just saying remote is not enough. You're going to end up with applicants and with employees who don't know how to navigate this non-descriptive thing.
Mm-hmm. And talking about navigating remote work, it is definitely new to quite a lot of organisations, although some organisations have been set up that way since they were born. But there are definitely like two sides of the story, aren't there? Lots of newspaper headlines on it's the only way to go, lots of newspapers on this is ruining everything. What would you say some of the barriers are to effective remote working for organizations?
For like the most immediate one is certainly real estate. If you bought an office and refurbished an office and invested a lot into your office, that's basically the difference between if you were founded as a remote company, you don't have to relearn anything because everything is set up that way. But if you were founded and grew as an in-office company, you have that office. And maybe you still have 5 years of lease coming up. And then the person who decides whether the lease is going to get cancelled is not the person who decides whether remote work will actually be a thing in the future. So you now have to suddenly make decisions that span a lot of parts of the company that don't usually talk with each other on a more strategic level. So there's a lot of very practical implications that look so daunting that a lot of decision makers then are like, oh no, this looks too complicated. Let's just go back to what we all know. Because at the end of the day, humans don't really enjoy change. So there's a lot of fear around, if we now step into this big unknown, what's going to happen? I don't see these people anymore. How do I know that they work? I always have been managing this way, and now suddenly I have learned everything new, but I have been doing this for 15 years. I don't want to admit that I don't know what I don't know. So let's just revert everybody back to what I'm comfortable with. And very often what I'm comfortable with, it might not necessarily be what my younger or more flexible or different employees might be comfortable with. But we are all like kind of stuck in our own bubble, and looking at becoming remote or being more distributed or even hybrid requires leaders to step out of their bubble. And that's uncomfortable. So there is a lot of fear. And if you combine fear with logistics questions, you end up with, let's just all go back to the office and pretend the pandemic never happened. Only, of course, that doesn't work for the employees, because they have now experienced what it means not to be having to go to the office every day.
And we know that not having to go to the office every day for some people has had like huge positive effects on their well-being and level of stress, and not having to do the commute. But one thing that has come up in some of the reports is about that kind of disconnect or loneliness that people might face in remote working. What's your experience of that?
So I've seen most loneliness with people who moved from in office to working from home, because their office was their social life. And especially during the pandemic, where for many people it was like, you go to the office and 3 days later, you don't see anyone ever anymore. And if you live alone, not even your friends, your parents, your kids, etc. So there was like, I'm in touch with all my friends at work every day, to I can't speak to anyone because of safety, because of the pandemic out there. So if you compare these two things, of course, remote work under these circumstances is outright harmful, because we are a very social species. You cannot just put us into little boxes and hope that we all thrive in there, because it won't work. The thing is, with remote work in a non-pandemic situation, you don't necessarily need your colleagues to be your only social connections. So if you go out there and you go to the community center, that most of the even small towns have community centers where you can actually get to know people who live there, get to know your neighbors, sign up for an improv show. Since you don't have the 2 hours of commute every day, you now actually have time to go out there and do things. And I think as a society, we kind of have to relearn this, getting to know people and creating friendship outside of the work situation, which is very interesting, because when we're children, we end up, our best friends are the people who were sitting next to us in school. So basically school, or our parents, by choosing the tool, chose our friends. And then we transported this logic to the university, and you ended up being friends with the people you did project work with. And then we transport that to work, and no one actually ever learned how do you actually make friends that you have chosen and that not the system has chosen for you. So how can we as individual people actually realize, okay, I need meaningful conversations. I'm not getting them looking at Netflix. So let me go out there and find people where we have something in common, so that we can create this shared experience completely independent of work, which also means you'll be more resilient if you leave that work, because your social connection don't require you to be at a specific job.
Yeah, I experienced this myself. So I left an organisation that I've been with for like 19 and a half years during the pandemic, moved from the city to rural life, And probably a year and a half in or so, I realised that I was kind of spending too much time on my own, not enough time connecting. And I did have to, like you said, kind of like, how do I connect in my community? So how do I get to know my neighbours? I go to a pub quiz across the road with them now, and I'm getting involved in communities where I can, like, we've got something in common, like you said. So a climate action network in West Lothian where I live, so I get to meet like-minded people, but I had to make the effort and get over my own kind of embarrassment and fear about talking to new people. But it doesn't have to all be about work, can
exactly.
Yeah, right.
And actually, I think because you are into sustainability, the fact that you're working remotely is also already some kind of climate activity, because you're not like jetting back and forth from the office every day. And I think as leaders, we need to learn to encourage people to find those connections outside of work. Like, maybe 5 or 10 years ago, if somebody was really, really activist outside of a job, that very often was seen as, oh, this is competing with their dedication to work. And I think nowadays it's exactly the other way around. If you know that somebody has like a passion, is volunteering somewhere or is really involved somewhere, it means, yes, they have other activities, but it also means they have a social network that can carry them through hard times. They won't disappear because of depression or loneliness, because they have that safety network.
Yeah.
And you get new ideas from outside.
Yeah,
because
definitely.
They are in another bubble, not just the work bubble.
Yeah. Great. So we started to touch there on some of the positives then of remote working, the impact on the climate being one that I'm particularly interested in, as you said. But what else would you say are both the organisational and the individual benefits of remote working?
So I think like there is organizational, individual, but there's also a societal benefit. And let me start with that one. Remote work has opened the labor market for a lot of people who before did not have access in the same way. Neurodivergent people who cannot work in an open office because it drives them completely unproductive. Parents who want to pick up their kids or need to drop off their kids, or who simply cannot pay for the amount of childcare that is necessary in a remote environment in countries where there isn't subsidies for childcare. People who have other types of problems, be this short-term or long-term, and they would need like really expensive accommodations at work. At home, they probably already have those accommodations anyway. So it's a lot easier for them to transition from doing one thing or the other. So this whole idea that we can bring more diversity into the workforce without that necessarily being a huge logistical overhead, I think this opens up a lot of innovative potential also for companies, because unless your customer is a white man, able-bodied, in their 30s or 40s, like those are easy to get to the office. But like if you have a more diverse customer base, you will want to have diverse people working for you as well, so that you can get everyone's perspective. And now they can work for you because they can come in from home and they have this home already adapted to what they need in their day-to-day. And I think this is kind of the personal gain that you have. Women in offices usually have a cardigan with them because office temperatures are set too low for women. And there's studies on that. Like, this is not something made up. I know every woman that I've ever talked to who has been into the office has complained about that. But it is just that, because we have a slightly higher well-being point when it comes to outside temperature than men. And in the office, you will always take the lower point because it's cheaper. And you can put on a cardigan, you cannot take off extra clothes. So, of course, at home, I can have the temperature that I want. I could put on the background music that I want. I can have the coffee as close or as far away as I want. I can have my pet sleeping at my feet. I can have a quick walk with the dog, which also has shown to have a lot of health, like mental health benefits, to actually be accompanied by an animal. And lots of people have adopted animals during the pandemic. So we don't want to leave those alone at home now either. So there's a lot of personal benefits to it, which then again also mean that people can be more motivated and more dedicated to the work that they're doing when they are online. Of course, as an organization, that means you have to have very clear boundaries around when should work happen and when should it not happen. Because even though a lot of leaders fear that people don't work when they are remote, the opposite is actually true. Most people work too much when they are remote because they feel constantly guilty when they're not online. So as an organization, you need to be very clear, hey, this is what we expect from you, either in outcome or in attendance or in when you should be there. And then actually also kind of shoo you away from the computer when it's outside your work hours.
Brilliant, thank you. And finally, what advice would you have, therefore, for, again, organisations and individuals to make the very best of remote working?
From an organizational point of view, like going back to the restaurant metaphor, be very clear on the kind of food that you serve, the kind of remote that you offer. Because the clearer you are on how you organize work, the easier it is for you to actually hire people who love the way you work and who don't make a compromise because, well, it is what it is, but who actually kind of actively opt in to the kind of work that you do. And yes, there's a lot of really, really vocal people out there who say, no, work from anywhere is digital nomadism. That's the gold standard. But there's also a lot of people out there who are like, I live in this village. I want to stay in this village. My kids go to the school in this village. I have no intention of going anywhere else. I just want a local national company that is going to pay into my local retirement fund and allows me to stay in this village where I can see my people grow up. But you need to be like, so you can attract digital nomads, or you can attract the person who is really, really locally rooted. And they probably require a little bit different policies. So make sure that you attract those that actually match what you want to offer as a company. Because otherwise you'll just be battling on a front that you should not be necessarily battling on, because it doesn't make sense. So, and if a company has it very clear how they define remote and how they're going to implement it, thus they can communicate about it. Communication needs to be super clear. Just putting remote on LinkedIn, it's not cutting it anymore. But what does it mean in practice? Then it also means that, of course, from the other side, as an employee or even as a candidate, you need to be very clear about what you actually need, and don't make that part of your identity. You are not a digital nomad. You are a person who is now in an age where you enjoy digital nomadism. And that might change or it might not. That doesn't matter. Don't make it your identity, because you might get to a point in life where you need to change what you need now. And it's a lot easier to change, okay, now I need this, than having to change your entire identity that was put around a specific thing. And I'm talking here from experience. I used to identify very clear as a minimalist. I have less than 100 things and I can move around. I would never stay in any place for longer than a year. And then I had twins. And it was very hard for me to move from the I'm a minimalist, I don't have anything, and then to just accept, no, look, I have 6 tiaras because I enjoy wearing a different tiara depending on the occasion. And we have definitely more than 100 toys or board games because I enjoy doing these things with these kids. So now I have started to say, okay, I am a remote worker, like working not from an office is kind of part of what I do. But if a company that I work with or collaborate with has offices in the same village I live in, and they have the offices at on the other side of the street, maybe I would end up going 2 days a week in the office. I don't know, and I'm not going to rule it out. And I think as individuals, we need to learn to not buy that much into the isms of life, but to actually be like, no, at this point in my life, this is what works for me, and this is what I'm going to do to actually make it work. And this might change, and that's totally fine, because we are not monolith.
I think that's such an important point, isn't it? Because you kind of, at a minute, it feels like you have to be in one camp or the other. And that's the same for organisations. We're remote, or we want everybody back in the office. And kind of there will always be some kind of middle ground where we can talk to each other as adults, and everybody gets what they need at whatever time that is, while still being productive and contributing to the workforce. Yeah, absolutely.
And the office is not the enemy. Getting people together to collaborate in person is very, very powerful. The question is, do you really need to get them together 50 weeks in the year?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's enough if you bring them together every 3 months or every 6 months, or based on regions from time to time. So that's the other thing. There's not just we meeting every day in the office and we never ever see a living colleague in real life ever again. You can mix and match this from a company standpoint. Whom do you think should spend time together to get them closer together, to get ideas inspired, and in which cadence? And who doesn't need to be together all the time? And who needs which cadence? Because yes, innovation or interesting ideas get developed in person, but shipping those ideas usually works better when everybody is at home and can actually really, really concentrate at what they want to ship. So being very clear, even on an organizational level, that whatever we are working with now will change over time, and we don't have one specific thing that will work for everyone. We're going to work this out so that the work gets done at the end of the day, because that's what we are here for at a company. We want to get the work done.
And we are still very much in that process of working it out, right? So
absolutely.
Not to be, if you set a particular cadence, then not to be afraid of changing that if it's not working after a couple of months or even a couple of weeks. I think we're all learning as we go with this one as well.
And it keeps us young. Having constant challenges, because change is hard, but change is also something that you can get used to. And it's a lot easier to do lots of little experiments, which are a lot less scary than changing everything, than having to do one big change once a year. Better do a little one experiment every month, see what happens, and people will just get used to the experiments.
Yeah. Great. Well, Valentina, I could speak about this with you all day, but we're going to have to end the session. So if people want to get in touch with you, how might they get in touch with you for more support?
So my website is valentinathörner.com. No one ever remembers how to write that. So search for my name on LinkedIn. That's really the easiest way to get hold of me. And while I don't really look at my email very often, I'm constantly on LinkedIn. So that's the easiest way to get in touch, to send me a DM and to set something up so that we can discuss. I also write a newsletter, which is called Empress of Remote, on Substack, and there I talk a lot about the intersection between product management, remote operations, and people management, because at the end of the day, this is about people.
Fabulous, thank you. And you can find us by visiting peachymondays.com. We can help you understand from your employee perspective what's working and what's not. Thank you again, Valentina, for your time and sharing all of your wisdom with us today.
Thank you for having me. This was fun.
Thank you.